the money worldwide is fake. Gold has been, and always will be real money. Gold is God's money. And that's what this is about. This is about forcing the population of the world to use fake money, and the real money is being accumulated.
Hey friends, after some stops and starts and some technical difficulties, I've got Bill Holter back on the line to talk about the difference between benevolent dictatorships and malevolent dictatorships. And boy, do we have a malevolent dictatorship in the Rockefeller Rothschild central bankers. Bill, welcome back, sir.
Glad to be here, Sean.
I know that you were weathering some terrible thunderstorms over the past day or two. How you doing down there in Texas?
We're all right. 5 or 6 inches of rain in the last 24 hours, and you're talking about another maybe 5 inches. So we'll end up getting about 3 months worth of rain in 2 days.
Well, Bill, I wanted to get you back on because, A, it's been far too long. You're one of our favorite commentators. You just wrote an important piece that we're going to talk about called The Crime of the Century. And, it's just such a crazy, topsy-turvy, upside-down world. Bruce Jenner has been named Glamour Magazine's Woman of the Year. What exciting news for him and his offspring.
What a crazy world.
What a crazy world. And then the other bit of news is, and everybody can sleep well now knowing that the U.S. debt limit has been raised to $19.6 trillion. So no need to worry.
Saved.
Yeah, we're saved. Bill, I bet if they were honest with us, they'd have to tell the people we were much closer to 100 or 200 trillion in debt if they wanted to count the unfunded liabilities. I mean, this 19.6 trillion is ridiculous. The Russians know it. The Chinese know it. I mean, what's the truth of the matter?
Well, the number is over 200 trillion. When you add in all the unfunded future liabilities, the guarantees, etc., the number is over 200 trillion. So you're talking about a debt to GDP ratio of over 1,000% or 10 to 1. And Banana Republic land historically has begun once you cross the 1 to 1 or 100% debt to GDP ratio. And if we run up to 19.6 trillion, even on the fabricated numbers, we're going to be 110% of debt to GDP.
Well, how does that compare to the other Western nations? How does that compare to what's going on in Japan? How does that compare to what's going on in the EU? I mean, is the only thing that's saving us at this point the fact that we're still technically benefiting from the world's reserve currency, the petrodollar? I mean, is that the only thing saving us, or is it the Pentagon, actually, at this point?
Well, you have to look at it and say that the Pentagon supports the use of the dollar.
Right.
And the dollar itself, the fact that we can print as many dollars as necessary to pay the debt, will never default and not pay dollars. The default will be because we print too many dollars. It'll be hyperinflation. So unlike, for instance, Greece that can't print euros, so they can't pay their debt, we can always pay our debt. We can always create more dollars. But it's the creation of the more dollars that will ultimately dilute the dollar to its real value or true value, which is ultimately whatever the paper's worth.
Right. So the plan is to inflate away the debt, not to actually pay it. Because, of course, every additional dollar is just more debt. It isn't actual wealth. They can't pay the debt with more debt.
Well, they are paying the debt with more debt. But at some point in time, the rest of the world is not going to want to play this game anymore.
Right.
I think we're right there.
Right.
They played the game because we had gold to deliver. And China has been accumulating 200 ounces or 200 tons per month of gold. That's 2,400 tons. That's basically 100% of world production. And they've been doing that for 2 or 3 years now. Once we can't deliver gold to China, or once we run out, the game's up. It's over. They won't play the game anymore because why should they? They have no more gold that they can vacuum up.
Mm-hmm. We started the call talking about the difference between malevolent dictatorships and benevolent dictatorships. And the reason I brought that up is because It seems to me at this point in human history, Bill, and I've said this many times, it's humanity versus the banksters. That's the real war that's going on planet Earth. But of course, we're given these proxy wars, we're given these bad excuse wars, we're given these war on terrorism wars, like when we had to go in and topple Gaddafi because he was such a horrible dictator. But do people really understand? I wonder if how many people understand, Bill, that he was actually a benevolent dictator in that Libya, a home was considered a natural human right. Education and medical treatment were all free. Gaddafi carried out the world's largest irrigation project. This all comes to us from our friends over at Global Research. This isn't me making these things up. These are facts. It was free to start a farming business. Electricity was free. Gaddafi raised the level of education. Before Gaddafi, only 25% of Libyans were literate. The figure was brought up to 87%, with 25% earning university degrees under Gaddafi. So the bankers went in, they toppled Gaddafi, and they turned Libya into a hellhole. I mean, that seems to be what the Pentagon is best at, huh?
You have to understand that both Gaddafi and Hussein publicly state that they were going to sell oil for euros. That's a huge no-no. That undercuts the petrodollar, and that's why they were removed.
Well, and tell people what happened to the gold. Where's Libya's gold, Bill?
Well, that was swept away right from the get-go. But that was swept away and been sold to the market, and very possibly is within China's borders.
You just wrote about, Bill, in one of your recent articles, the crime of the century. And you wrote, we will no doubt look back upon the current era as the crime of the century for so many different reasons. Actually, current times represent the worst financial crimes of all time. And I think it's obvious to anyone paying attention, Bill, that is the fact of the matter. I mean, the bankers have taken over, and they're using the U.S. military-industrial complex, as their strong arm, and they're trying to keep the world tied to this fiat dollar system, which is in the process of collapsing. And you also write about in the article that the COMEX is really the smoking gun of what we're saying here, right? They're trying to cover it all up, but there's no more gold.
Right. The COMEX is the core. The dollar itself is a never pay model. In other words, dollars, treasuries, promises to pay more dollars. So it's a never pay with anything real model. And in order to keep strength or confidence in the dollar, you cannot have high gold prices, high and rising prices. So the COMEX has been used to dilute, if you will, the price of gold. And that's been done with the sale of literally millions of ounces of paper gold to suppress the price. And it's gotten to the point now, if you look at the amount of contracts outstanding versus, I think it's 5.6 or 5.7 tons of registered gold, it's 240 something to 1. So in other words, there's 240 claims or potential claims to the gold, the registered gold that's in COMEX. Now, what's really interesting, October is a delivery month. It's not a major delivery month. The biggest one is coming up. That's in December. But we started the month out at roughly 10 tons of gold were standing versus 5.7 tons of gold registered. So that was a potential problem. And that's bled down like it has every month, but not. There's only been two deliveries into COMEX from what I see tracking the registered and eligible category. There were two eligible deliveries, one for 32,000 ton kilo gold, and there was one other 300 and a fraction ounces delivered to a customer account. There has been no gold that we've seen being delivered into the registered category. That doesn't make sense. This is a delivery month. And also the amount of gold in the registered category hasn't changed since the beginning of the month. How are they delivering gold out? You can only speculate that it's being done with cash. It's cash settlement.
Yeah, and that's what we've suspected they're doing for a long time because they don't have enough gold to deliver. So, and I know people get tired of talking about the COMEX. People believe this can go on forever, and that's what they'll say. But following this stuff is important, Bill, because it's quantifiable. It's just quantifiable evidence of the crime. And you wrote, Yes, yes, the open interest always collapses and delivery always gets made. But doesn't it seem strange to you that a market with less than $200 million worth of inventory is the pricing mechanism to a $5 trillion monetary asset? It's just smoke and mirrors.
Well, and as I said in that article, it's no longer the tail wagging the dog. It's two or three hairs on the tail wagging the dog. $200 million is zero. That could be wiped out in one trade. And when one of these numerous black swans that are circling around, when one of them lands, that gold will be gone instantaneously. And owners of gold will not sell it. It will not be offered for sale. Gold will go no offer.
Bill, let me ask you, I mean, we've talked about this before, but as you look at these numbers, like raising the debt ceiling to 19.6 trillion, $8.5 trillion missing from the Pentagon, just endless financial crimes against the people, nation states waking up to the fact that that Fort Knox probably doesn't have the gold that's claimed to be there. In the real world, as you look forward, a decade, 5 years, 2 years, at what point do you think that we're going to see the hyperinflation that we know is baked in the cake?
I can't tell you time-wise, but what we just talked about, gold going no offer, that's owners of gold refusing to sell $4. That more or less is your definition of inflation, hyperinflation. Now let's go one step further. People are talking about, oh, well, the dollar's going up. What's the dollar going up against? It's going up against other fiat currencies on the DXY index. It's going up against the euro. It's going up against the pound versus the yen. If you look over the last month or 2 months, it hasn't gone up against gold. Gold has actually gone higher versus the dollar. But the DXY index is an index of fiat currencies. What you have to look at is what have these currencies done versus a cup of coffee or versus a hamburger or your doctor's bill or what have you. Maybe we should call it the hamburger index. How many hamburgers does €1 buy or $1 or whatever? That's the important thing, is that the DXY index it's like a fantasy index, because you're comparing all fiat currencies that ultimately have a value of zero against each other. You're not comparing them against real things about your daily cost of living and things you need to buy.
Yeah, I agree with you, Bill. And let's talk about this. You mentioned just prior to the call starting that you were very concerned about news that I'm concerned about too, because it's very, very strange. Why in the world would 3 Chinese battleships be planning to dock in a Florida port on November 3rd? That's unsettling, is it not?
It's unsettling. I can't even speculate as to why. If you go back a week and a half ago, you had Obama saying that we were going to send naval ships to the South Sea islands. Mm-hmm. And China responded the same day or following day, basically, what in the world could the Americans be thinking? We won't allow that.
Right.
And as it turns out, the ships have not been sent. So our bluff was called. Now, as to why we would allow 3 Chinese ships to dock, I don't know. They say that this was planned several months ago. I do know that the date, November 3rd, is highly suspicious, because if you go back to January, I think it was the first issue of The Economist magazine, if you remember Alice in Wonderland standing and viewing all of the world leaders with a nuclear explosion in the background, and there were 2 arrows at her feet. And on the feathers, on the tails of the arrows, one was 11.3 and the other was 11.5. So you're talking about November 3rd, November 5th, and the Chinese are supposed to dock on 11.3. I don't know if there's any connection. I just think it's all unusual.
Well, we know that the madmen in control of this planet have some sort of strange moral code in which they like to tell people, basically, through symbology, through occult messaging. Maybe just they're telling each other, but those of us who are awake can pick up on these signals in the symbology. They like to tell us what they're going to do before they do it. So for you to mention The Economist magazine from January, is absolutely not out of
Right.
bounds, especially when we know that the Rothschild-owned Economist magazine back in 1988 predict the coming new world currency in 2018, Bill. That's a frightening fact that the Chinese are going to port 3 battleships in Florida. It's like some deal has been made, right? It's almost like there's a public acquiescence to the Chinese, a public statement of the United States standing down because they've got us in a corner.
Right. What you mentioned before, the elite believe it is poor etiquette to destroy someone without giving them proper warning. Now, if the proper warning is not listened to, adhered to, it's your own fault.
That's right. They're social Darwinists,
That's right.
see?
There's
And because they're
exactly
social Darwinists, they believe that, hey, it's the survival of the fittest, and actually we think so little of you, we're going to tell you what we're going to do to you before we do it, and you're still not going to do anything about it. And,
right.
I think the most disturbing thing about that, Bill, is that, the allegory or the metaphor of, the Wizard of Oz, the men behind the curtain. If you pull the curtain back, you see they're just fragile, pedophilic, Satanist vampires, that could be taken out with one punch in a physical fist fight, but they wield the power of the printing press, and they wield the power of the Pentagon, and they wield the power of the satanic New World Order. And to that end, they're very scary men, but they're just men. They're just frail, flesh and blood men. I mean, unless they actually are demons, which is perhaps possible, because what they're doing is demonic, Bill. That's the craziest part. What they're doing is so insane. They're taking the world to the brink of World War III.
Very true.
Well, Bill, I know we've had some connection problems today. I apologize to the audience, and I apologize to you, Bill, too. The fact of the matter is that at the end of the day, as we've discussed before, the men behind the curtain, the Wizard of Oz is a great allegory for what this is. You pull the
Right.
curtain back, and you discover that they're just frail, old, satanic, demonic pedophiles. They're just rotten flesh and blood human beings. And those are the men that we need to focus on, because the real war at this point is humanity versus the banksters.
Right. It's about the money, and the money worldwide is fake. Gold has been, and always will be real money. Gold is God's money, and that's what this is about. This is about forcing the population of the world to use fake money, and the real money is being accumulated. It's being withdrawn. When all is said and done, it is about the banksters pulling levers behind the curtain, creating a facade, and at some point in time, the curtain gets pulled back and the facade turns to reality. And the reality is the world is broke. The world is bankrupt. Everything has been levered upon.
Everything has been levered upon. And I want to leave people with this. As it relates to silver and the price of silver being around $15, $16 today in 2015 dollars, just run with me on this one, Bill, because I want you to verify my logic, or tell me I'm off base. John Williams has told us now that the 1980 adjusted all-time high, the inflation-adjusted all-time high of silver in 2015 dollars is $601 an ounce, okay? So what that means, guys, is that in 1980, when silver briefly hit 50 in 1980 dollars, if we were to adjust those 1980 dollars for all the inflation today, that all-time high would be $601. And so, Bill, here's my logic. If people think that number is ridiculous and too high, let's cut 600 in half. Let's call it 300. And then let's cut that in half again. Let's call it 150. So that $50 all-time high in 1980 at 300 becomes 25. And if we cut that in half again, $12.50 silver in 1980 becomes $150 silver in today's dollars. And if we cut it in half again, then $6.25 silver in 1980 is worth $75 in today's dollars. And the reason I wanted to break that down for people, and I keep bringing it up, but the reason I wanted to break that down for people, Bill, is that $6.25 silver in 1980 should be worth $75 in today's dollars, and you can go buy physical silver today for $15. That's astounding.
I'll sum it up for you. Silver is a no-brainer. That's what you just said. Silver is a no-brainer if you cut times in half the 1980 high. Silver is the cheapest asset on the planet.
Yep. It absolutely is. And we know it because we know about the manipulation, right? We understand what they've done.
Right, and silver is most likely to be the next element on the periodic chart to become, for all intents and purposes, extinct. There's a roughly, let's call it 20 years, unless there's some type of new technology that can mine and separate and locate silver better than the current technology. The silver mining industry is going to be pretty much done within 20 years. So there won't be any economic silver left to mine.
Well, I've heard that as well, and people might be dubious, but they need to understand that the primary silver miners have been absolutely decimated by the paper price manipulation. So, as
Right.
people know, people who listen know this, it sounds like a broken record, but the primary silver miners have been gutted. Many of them are going out of business. They can't compete, and they certainly can't afford to mine something that's costing them more than they can sell it for.
Right. It makes no sense. Many mines have gone on care and maintenance.
Hmm.
Many mines have just shut down.
Yeah,
There's
well,
100. There's 125 million ounce. I believe it's 125 million here in Texas that went on care and maintenance.
right, and and for people who will say, "Well, who cares about the primary silver miners? Most of silver is a byproduct of other mining." Well, look at Glencore. Look at a lot of the other mining companies that are struggling because copper's been decimated. The price of copper and zinc have been decimated. Again, look at what's going on with Glencore. This is a systematic. I'd almost say, Bill, this is a systemic attack on mining companies, again, by the bankers, because they want to destroy precious metals in their entirety so that people don't turn back to them in the future. That's my thesis. I wonder if I'm right or if I'm wrong, because the Chinese don't care. They're buying as much gold as they can, so are the Russians.
How do you know the bankers are not somehow getting long positions in the miners?
Mm-hmm.
They've shaken the trees and shaken the trees and shaken the trees. How do you know that the banksters have not been accumulating positions in the miners?
Mm-hmm. No,
One hand sells them hard, and the other hand steps up and buys what's being shaken loose.
well, that is what they love to do. They love to buy up assets at pennies on the dollar. That's how the Rothschilds got to be the world's wealthiest family, by some accounts.
Right, and they will be long the explosion in the prices of gold and silver. They won't be short. The
Okay.
Rothschilds, the major interests, they will be long. Now, some of the commercials, uh, they may be given up for lost and not given the cue that the turn is here, and they may be sacrificed. So you may see some institutions sacrificed on the short side. We just had this major COT short that was revealed yesterday, which was calculated as of last Tuesday. So there's a major short position by the commercials in both gold and silver. It was a huge jump. If gold and silver were to turn Monday morning or sometime next week or the following week, and that short position could decimate the commercials, that could be your commercial signal failure. It's the big shark eating the little sharks.
Right. Well, I want to leave you with one last thing. I want your opinion on one last thing here before we lose you, Bill. And thanks so much for being generous with your time because of all the technical difficulties. I've taken almost an hour of your time, which will amount to about a 25-minute interview. Uh, a court ruling has paved the way for mass confiscation of firearms in America. Bill, tell me if this isn't the ultimate and last battle that Americans must be aware of, because if they disarm the American people, if they take away our Second Amendment, because God knows they're coming after our First Amendment rights, right, with the TPP and copyright and all this other stuff, new copyright laws enforced by corporations. They
I
want to
hadn't heard about this.
Let me read this to you. This is bad news. This comes from our friend Alex Thomas over at IntelliHub, who writes, in a ruling that directly paves the way for mass confiscation of firearms in America, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit, in a much anticipated decision, has upheld the constitutionality of the New York SAFE Act of 2013. Shockingly, the court ruled that nearly all of the most drastic gun control law in the history of the United States did not violate the Second Amendment and therefore is constitutional. That's right. A law passed in the wake of Sandy Hook that included and paved the way for confiscation of millions of legally purchased firearms has been ruled constitutional, with proponents already calling for a similar law to be enacted at the federal level. Bill, you know that they're coming after our guns. You know that if they disarm the people like they did the people of Australia, the American people will be helpless. This is going to end up going to the Supreme Court, and the way the Supreme Court has been ruling lately against us on Obamacare and all sorts of other measures, this is a very, very concerning development, because these lower courts, they don't give a crap about the Constitution, and it seems like the highest court in the land often doesn't either.
Well, Sean, you make the comparison to what Australia did. I'd go back much further, and I would make the comparison to what Germany did in the 1930s. Nazi Germany, the Holocaust, none of that would have happened if the public had not been disarmed.
You're right. They have to disarm the people to roll out a malevolent dictatorship. They already have a malevolent dictatorship behind the scenes. This is a great way to round out our interview, Bill. They already have a malevolent dictatorship behind the scenes with their Rockefeller, Rothschild, central banking, Federal Reserve, doing what they've done to the American people. And now they're revealing themselves, and the tyranny is becoming overt. It's becoming absolutely overt. And I think there's a couple of lines in the sand. I want to just leave you with this. We've got mandatory vaccination laws having been just signed into law by Jerry Brown in California. That's a line in the sand. If they come after our guns, that is the line in the sand. The people cannot stand for it. And that is the clarion call that we want to share on this broadcast, is that the tyranny is now overt.
Well, you would think if they crossed that line and nullify or break the Second Amendment, you would more than likely see bloodshed. I mean, I just don't see the American people giving up that inalienable right since the country's birth.
I agree with you, Bill. Bill, I want to thank you so much. Thank you for your patience today, and please tell people how they can find you. Tell us about JS Mineset and what's going on over there.
Yeah, you can find my work at www.jsmineset.com. We are actually doing a conference. We plan to do a conference in Los Angeles on Saturday, November 14th. So if anybody's interested, Jim Sinclair, myself, and Andy Scheckman from Miles Franklin will be doing a Q&A session in Los Angeles, November 14th.
Oh, cool. Well, guys, we feature Bill Holter's articles at the top of SGT Report when he writes them, which is several times a week. And Bill, I want to thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Sean. It's a pleasure.
Always a pleasure, sir. And guys, thank you for tuning in. We appreciate your support at sgtreport.com, at thelibertymill.com, and at the other site, thephaser.com. Real news 24/7. The antidote to corporate propaganda, which is all they want to give us, is their propaganda. All right, guys, God bless. Have a great week.